A wealthy couple walks into a small-town diner, and they see an elderly waitress moving slowly between tables, her hands trembling as she carries their order. The woman sneers, makes a cruel comment about her age, and when the waitress accidentally spills a drop of coffee, the man does something unthinkable. He slaps her across the face so hard, she crashes to the floor. But here's what they didn't know. Sitting quietly in the corner booth, finishing his black coffee, was her son. And he wasn't just any son. He was Delta Force, the most elite soldier in the US military, and what he was about to do would turn their privileged world upside down. Before we begin, tell us wherever in the world you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The morning air in Maple Creek, Montana, carried the smell of pine and fresh bread from Martha's Diner, a place that had stood on Main Street for 42 years. The kind of diner where everyone knew your name, where the coffee was always hot, and where the same woman had served breakfast to 3 generations of families. Her name was Rose Cunningham, and at 73 years old, she still showed up at 5:30 every morning to unlock the doors and start the coffee maker. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be, and her feet ached by noon. But this diner, this little corner of the world, was hers, and she took pride in every plate she served. What Rose didn't talk about, what she kept folded in a drawer at home, was a flag, a triangle of stars and stripes that had been handed to her 30 years ago when they told her her husband wouldn't be coming home from Desert Storm. And what no one in town knew, except for her, was that her son, the quiet boy who used to bus tables in this very diner, had followed in his father's footsteps. But he'd gone further, deeper into a world of shadows and sacrifice, a world where his name didn't exist on any public record, because he was Delta Force. And today, for the first time in 3 years, he was home. The corner booth at Martha's Diner had always been Jackson Cunningham's favorite spot. Even as a kid, when he used to help his mom during summer breaks, he'd take his breaks there, tucked away where he could see the whole room. The red vinyl was cracked in places, patched with duct tape that had faded from silver to gray. The table had a wobble that no amount of folded napkins could quite fix. But it was home. And today, after 3 years of operations in places whose names he couldn't speak, in countries that didn't officially know he was there, Jackson sat in that same booth, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something close to peace. He was a big man, 6'3", with shoulders that filled out his simple grey Henley shirt in a way that suggested the kind of strength that came from carrying heavy gear across hostile terrain. His hair was dark, cut military short but not quite regulation, because technically he wasn't supposed to look military. His face was angular, weathered in a way that made him look older than his 38 years. There was a scar, thin and white, that ran from his left temple down to his cheekbone. If you asked, he'd tell you it was from a hiking accident. The truth involved a knife fight in a Syrian basement, but that truth lived in a classified file in Fort Bragg. His eyes were what people noticed most, when they bothered to look at him at all. They were a pale, sharp blue, the kind of eyes that saw everything, that calculated distances and threats and exit routes without conscious thought. But right now, as he watched his mother move between the tables, those eyes were soft, gentle, filled with a love so profound it made his chest ache. She was 73 years old, his mum, and she moved like it. Her back wasn't quite straight anymore, curved slightly from years of bending over tables and carrying heavy trays. Her hands, those hands that used to braid his sister's hair and pack his school lunches and hold his face when he cried about his dad, they trembled now. Not a lot, just enough that he noticed. Just enough that it made something fierce and protective rise up in him. Rose Cunningham wore the same uniform she'd worn for 40 years. Pink dress, white apron, sensible white sneakers that had seen better days. Her hair, once the same dark brown as his, was silver now, pulled back in a bun that she'd probably fixed 100 times already this morning. She had his dad's smile, warm, real, the kind of smile that made strangers feel like family. Jackson had been watching her for 2 hours now, nursing the same cup of coffee, and she still hadn't noticed him. He'd come in through the back, early, before the morning rush, and slipped into this booth while she was in the kitchen. He wanted to just watch her for a while, to see her in her element, to remember this, in case it was another 3 years before he made it home again. She'd just served a table of construction workers their breakfast, laughing at something one of them said, and Jackson saw the way she pressed her hand against her lower back as she walked away, saw the way she paused for just a second before picking up the coffee pot to make rounds. His mother was in pain, every day, and she never complained, never quit, because this diner, this place, it was all she had left of the life she'd built with his dad. Jackson's hand tightened around his coffee mug. He wanted to tell her to sit down, to rest, to let him take care of her. He wanted to tell her that she'd done enough, that she'd earned the right to stop carrying the weight of the world on her aging shoulders. But he knew Rose Cunningham, knew that this diner was her pride, her purpose, knew that telling her to stop would break something in her that couldn't be fixed. So he just watched, and waited, and felt grateful for every second he got to sit here, in this small-town Montana diner, watching his mother be exactly who she'd always been, a fighter, a survivor. The strongest person he'd ever known. The bell above the door chimed. It was a sound Jackson had heard 1,000 times growing up, cheerful and welcoming, but something made him look up. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the sudden shift in the diner's energy. Maybe it was the way the conversations seemed to dip and then rise again, the way they do when something doesn't quite fit. The couple that walked through the door didn't belong in Maple Creek, Montana, and they knew it. More than that, they wanted everyone else to know it too. Blake Harrington III was the kind of man who'd never heard the word no in any context that mattered. He was 32, tall, with the kind of lean, athletic build that came from personal trainers and boutique gyms, not from actual work. His hair was artfully styled, that deliberately messy look that probably took 20 minutes and cost more than Rose made in a day. He wore a navy blue cashmere sweater, sleeves pushed up to show a Rolex that caught the morning light. His jeans were designer, the kind that cost $600 to look worn in. His shoes were Italian leather, and they'd never seen a day of real weather. But it was his face that told you everything you needed to know about Blake Harrington III. It was handsome in that generic, privileged way. Strong jaw, straight nose, teeth too white to be natural. But his eyes, they were cold, entitled. They looked at Martha's diner, at the cracked vinyl booths and the dated decor and the working-class people eating their breakfast. And they found it all amusing in a way that made Jackson's jaw tighten. The woman with him was cut from the same cloth. Vanessa Pierce had the kind of beauty that required constant maintenance. She was maybe 27, with long blonde hair that had been professionally highlighted to look sun-kissed. Her makeup was flawless. Her lips painted a shade of red that matched her designer purse. She wore a white silk blouse that probably cost more than Rose's monthly rent, paired with black slacks and heels that clicked against the diner's worn linoleum floor like a judgment. She looked around the diner with barely concealed disgust, her nose wrinkling slightly as if the smell of bacon and coffee offended her refined sensibilities. "Blake, seriously?" Her voice carried across the diner, high and sharp. "This is where you wanted to stop? We passed a Starbucks, 20 miles back." Blake laughed, that easy, confident laugh of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Come on, Vanessa. We're doing the whole authentic small-town America thing, remember? For the campaign." He said the word campaign like it was a game, an adventure. "Dad wants me to connect with real people before the election cycle heats up. Show them I'm not just some elitist." The irony of that statement, delivered in a voice dripping with condescension while wearing a sweater that cost more than most people's monthly salary, was apparently lost on him. They chose a booth in the middle of the diner, not because it was the best seat, but because it put them at the center of attention. Blake sprawled in his seat, legs extended, taking up space in that way men who've never been challenged tend to do. Vanessa perched on the edge of hers, pulling out her phone immediately. clearly determined to have as little contact with her surroundings as possible. Jackson watched them from his corner. Watched the way Blake's eyes tracked Rose as she finished with another table. Watched the way Vanessa's lip curled when she noticed the crack in the vinyl booth across from them. These were people who saw other human beings as props in their own story, as extras, as less than. He'd seen men like Blake before, in different contexts, different countries. The kind of men who believed their wealth, their name, their connections, made them untouchable, made them better. Jackson had watched men like that order atrocities with the same casual tone Blake probably used to order wine at expensive restaurants. He'd stopped men like that. Permanently, in some cases. His hand rested on the table, relaxed, but his body was alert now, coiled, ready. It was a state he could slip into without thinking, after years of training, years of operations where the difference between life and death was measured in milliseconds of reaction time. Rose approached their table, menu in hand, that same warm smile on her face that she gave every customer, because that's who she was. She didn't see wealth or poverty, young or old. She saw people, and she treated every single one of them with dignity. "Morning, folks," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "Welcome to Martha's Diner. Can I start you off with some coffee?" Blake looked up at her, and Jackson saw it. That flicker of annoyance that someone of her station, her age, her economic class was speaking to him. "Is it fresh?" Blake asked, his tone dismissive. Rose's smile didn't falter. "Made it myself about 20 minutes ago. Fresh as it gets." "Fine. Black. And make sure it's hot. I can't stand lukewarm coffee." He said it like an accusation, like she'd already failed him. "Of course, sweetie," Rose said, and Jackson loved her for that word. Sweetie. The same word she'd used for every customer for 40 years. A word that asserted her humanity, her warmth, her refusal to be diminished. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone. "Do you have any almond milk? Or oat milk? Anything that's not, actual milk?" "I'm sorry, honey. We've got regular milk and cream. We're a small place. We don't usually stock the alternatives." Vanessa's eyes finally lifted, fixing on Rose with undisguised disdain. "Of course you don't. Blake, why are we here? This is ridiculous. Just get me a water," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "With lemon. Fresh lemon. Not that bottled juice." Rose nodded, writing it down on her pad, even though it was just coffee and water. "I'll be right back with those drinks and give you folks a minute to look at the menu." As she walked away, Jackson heard Vanessa's voice, not even bothering to lower it. "Oh my God, Blake. Did you see her hands? They were literally shaking. Should someone that old even be working? It's kind of sad, honestly." Blake laughed. "It's character, babe. This is authentic America. The kind of thing that polls well with voters. People like seeing that we appreciate the working class. Appreciate them from a distance." "Maybe," Vanessa muttered. "I feel like I need a tetanus shot just sitting here." Jackson's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. He could feel his pulse, steady and controlled, but his blood was heating up. These people were talking about his mother, about a woman who'd worked every day of her life, who'd raised 2 kids alone after her husband died serving their country, who'd put him through college with nothing but tips and sheer determination, and they were treating her like she was part of the scenery, like she was less than human. He watched Rose in the kitchen, pouring their coffee, cutting a fresh lemon. She'd heard them. He could tell by the set of her shoulders, the way she paused for just a second before picking up the tray. His mother had heard every cruel word, and she was going to go back out there and serve them with a smile anyway, because that's what she'd always taught him. You treat people with dignity, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it. Rose came back with the tray, moving carefully. Her hands were trembling a little more now. Maybe it was fatigue. Maybe it was the weight of their cruelty. Maybe it was just age, the inevitable betrayal of a body that had worked too hard for too long. She set the water down in front of Vanessa first, a perfect slice of lemon on the side. There you go, honey. Then she reached for Blake's coffee. The mug was full, steam rising from the black surface. She lifted it from the tray, began to set it down, and that's when it happened. Her hand trembled. Just a fraction. Just enough. The mug tilted, and a single drop of coffee splashed onto the table. Not on Blake, not on his expensive sweater, just on the table. One drop, maybe a quarter of an inch in diameter. Are you kidding me? Blake's voice cut through the diner like a whip. Are you serious right now? Rose's eyes widened. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Let me just… She reached for a napkin, but Blake's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was tight, meant to hurt. Do you have any idea how much this sweater costs? If you'd gotten coffee on it, you'd be working for a year to pay it off. Sir, please. I didn't get any on you. I just what? You're too old and incompetent to do your job. He released her wrist with a shove. Look at you. Your hands are shaking like you've got Parkinson's. You shouldn't be working. You're a liability. Jackson was out of his booth, moving, every muscle in his body coiled to spring. But he forced himself to stop, to wait, to watch, because he needed to see how far this would go. Needed to know exactly what kind of man Blake Harrington III was before he made his move. Rose stepped back, her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm very sorry, sir. There's no charge for your meal today. I'll just… No charge? Vanessa's voice dripped with mock concern. Blake, I don't think we can accept free food from a place like this. Who knows what kind of health code violations they have? I mean, if she can't even hold a coffee cup steady. Maybe you should retire, Blake said, his voice cruel now, enjoying this. Go home. Let someone who can actually do the job take over. I'm sure there's a nice nursing home somewhere that would take you. Other customers were watching now. The construction workers had stopped eating. A young couple with a baby had gone quiet. Everyone in the diner was witnessing this humiliation, and no one was moving, because that's what men like Blake counted on, that their wealth, their confidence, their sheer audacity would freeze normal people in place. Rose's eyes were filling with tears, but she wouldn't let them fall. Jackson knew that stubborn pride. He'd inherited it from her. I'll get your food order when you're ready, she said quietly, her voice only shaking a little. Again, I apologize. She turned to walk away, and that's when Blake did it. He stood up, fast, aggressive, moved into her space so she had to stop, had to look up at him because he was taller and he wanted her to feel small. You know what your problem is, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Your generation. You think the world owes you something just because you showed up. You think you deserve respect just for being old. Well, here's a reality check, sweetheart. And then he drew his hand back and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the diner like a gunshot. Sharp, final, impossible to unhear. Rose's head snapped to the side from the force of it. Her body, already unsteady, couldn't handle the impact. She stumbled backward, her feet tangling in themselves, and then she was falling. It felt like slow motion to Jackson. Watching his mother, this woman who'd survived poverty and widowhood and decades of back-breaking work, crumbling to the floor of her own diner. She hit hard. Her hip struck first, then her shoulder. The sound of her body hitting the linoleum was worse than the slap somehow. More final, more devastating. The diner went absolutely silent. Not a fork moved. Not a breath was drawn. The whole world had contracted to this moment. This awful, crystallizing moment where a man who'd never known consequence had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, but not in horror. In shock that Blake had actually done it, sure, but also in a kind of thrilled excitement, like this was drama, entertainment, something to tell their friends about later. Blake stood over Rose's fallen form, his chest heaving, his face flushed with adrenaline and righteous anger. Maybe that'll teach you some respect, he said, and then he looked up and saw the construction workers starting to rise from their booth. saw the old farmer in the corner reaching for his phone, saw the young mother clutching her baby and staring at him with undisguised horror. "What?" Blake spread his hands, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "She assaulted me first. That coffee could have burned me. I was defending myself. You all saw it." No one spoke. "Because what do you say to that kind of delusion?" Jackson was already moving. He'd been moving since the moment Blake's hand made contact with his mother's face. Moving with the controlled precision of a man who'd spent 15 years learning exactly how much force a human body could take and how to deliver it with surgical accuracy. But to everyone else in the diner, it looked like he appeared out of nowhere. 1 second he was in the corner booth, hidden in the shadows. The next, he was standing between Blake and his mother, and the temperature in the room had dropped about 20 degrees. Jackson didn't rush, didn't charge, didn't let his emotion control his movement. He just stood there, and his presence filled the space in a way that made Blake take an involuntary step backward. "Step away from her," Jackson said. His voice was quiet, calm, the kind of calm that was more terrifying than shouting because it was absolute. It was the voice of a man who'd given orders in combat, who'd directed life and death operations, who'd stood in rooms with warlords and terrorists and made them understand that he was the most dangerous person present. Blake's eyes widened. He'd been so focused on Rose, on his performance of dominance, that he hadn't noticed the man in the corner booth, hadn't registered the threat until it was standing right in front of him. "Who the hell are you?" Blake demanded, but his voice cracked slightly. His body, smarter than his ego, recognized what his brain refused to accept. This was not a man to challenge. Jackson didn't answer. He knelt beside his mother, his eyes never leaving Blake, and gently touched her shoulder. "Mom, it's me. I'm here." Rose looked up at her son, and the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. Not from pain, though her face was already starting to bruise where Blake had struck her. From relief, from love, from the profound comfort of knowing she wasn't alone. "Jackson," she whispered. "Baby, when did you—" "Shh, don't move yet. Let me check you." His hands, those same hands that could field-strip a rifle in the dark or snap a man's neck with clinical efficiency, were infinitely gentle as they checked her arms, her back, her hip, looking for breaks, for serious injury. Blake's moment of uncertainty passed. His ego, that massive, fragile thing, reasserted itself. "Oh, so this is your son? Well, that explains a lot. Trash raising trash. You need to get her out of here before I sue this place into the ground. She attacked me. I've got witnesses." Jackson stood up, slowly. The movement was controlled, economical, and somehow more threatening than if he'd lunged. He turned to face Blake fully for the first time, and Blake got a good look at him, really saw him, saw the scar, saw the cold blue eyes that had seen things Blake's privileged mind couldn't imagine, saw the way he stood, balanced, ready, like a coiled spring, saw the barely contained violence in every line of his body. "You put your hands on my mother," Jackson said, and each word was carved from ice. "You struck a 73-year-old woman because she spilled a drop of coffee. 1 drop. On a table. And now you're going to tell me what happens next." Blake's hands clenched into fists, but he didn't move forward. Couldn't move forward. Every survival instinct he possessed was screaming at him to back away, but his ego wouldn't let him. "You threatening me? Do you have any idea who I am? Who my father is? I can have this place shut down with 1 phone call. I can have you arrested. You can try," Jackson said softly. "Please, I'm begging you. Try." The diner stayed silent. The construction workers were on their feet now, forming a loose semicircle. The old farmer had his phone out, recording. The young mother had her baby pressed against her shoulder, but she was watching, bearing witness. Vanessa finally found her voice. "Blake, maybe we should just go. This place is obviously not worth our time." But Blake had gone too far to back down now. His face was red, his breathing rapid. He was used to people folding when he applied pressure, used to his name, his father's power, his money solving every problem. The fact that this man, this nobody from this nowhere town, wasn't cowering made him angrier than the coffee ever could have. "You want to do this?" Blake said, puffing up his chest. "Fine. I'll have my father's attorneys bury you. I'll have the police here in 5 minutes. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make one more threat," Jackson interrupted, his voice still that same deadly calm. "And I'll put you through that window." He wasn't bluffing. Everyone in the diner knew he wasn't bluffing. Blake knew he wasn't bluffing. And for the first time in his privileged, consequence-free life, Blake Harrington III felt genuine fear. Blake Harrington III had never been truly afraid before. He'd felt nervousness, sure, like the time he thought he might not get into Yale, or the brief panic when that DUI almost made the papers, but his father had fixed those things. Money had fixed those things. Fear, the real kind, the kind that makes your stomach drop and your hands go cold, that was something he'd only seen in other people, usually people he was crushing. But looking at Jackson Cunningham, at those pale blue eyes that held absolutely no mercy, Blake felt it. Real fear. The kind that lives in your DNA from when humans were prey animals. The kind that makes you want to run. He didn't run. His pride wouldn't let him, but he took another step back, and his hand moved to his pocket, fumbling for his phone. "I'm calling the police. I'm pressing charges. You threatened me. Everyone heard it." Jackson didn't move, didn't even blink. He just stood there, and somehow his stillness was more intimidating than any aggressive posture could have been. "Go ahead. Call them." Behind him, Rose was being helped to her feet by one of the construction workers, a big guy named Tommy, who'd been eating at Martha's diner since he was a kid. "Easy, Miss Rose. Let's get you to a chair. Jimmy, grab some ice." Rose touched the side of her face where Blake had struck her. It was already swelling, the red mark darkening to purple. But her eyes were on her son, filled with concern, not for herself, for him, because she knew what he was capable of. She'd lost her husband to war, and she'd spent the last 15 years terrified she'd lose her son the same way. She knew he was dangerous. She just never thought she'd see it directed at someone in her own diner. "Jackson, baby, don't," she said softly. "He's not worth it." But Jackson wasn't listening to her. His entire focus was on Blake, who was now frantically dialing, his hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to unlock his phone. Vanessa had moved away from the booth, pressing herself against the wall, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. This wasn't fun anymore. This wasn't an amusing story about slumming it in small-town America. This was real, and it was dangerous, and she was desperately trying to calculate how to distance herself from Blake without making herself a target. "Yes, police? I need to report an assault," Blake said into his phone, his voice high and tight. "I'm at Martha's diner on Main Street. A man just threatened me. He's dangerous. He said he was going to throw me through a window. You need to send someone immediately." He lowered the phone, and some of his confidence returned now that help was coming, now that the structure of law and order and civilization was being invoked. "They'll be here in 5 minutes. And when they get here, you're going to jail. You threatened me. Assault charges, at minimum." "Interesting," Jackson said, his tone conversational now, almost pleasant. "Assault charges. For threatening you. After you actually struck my mother, after you put your hands on a 73-year-old woman and knocked her to the ground." He looked around the diner. "Everyone here saw that, right?" The construction workers nodded. The old farmer held up his phone. "Got the whole thing on video, son. Clear as day." "So do I," said the young mother, her voice shaky but determined. "I got it from the moment you walked in until right now." Blake's face paled slightly. That doesn't matter." She spilled coffee on me. "I was defending myself from assault." She spilled a drop on the table, Jackson corrected. "Not on you. On the table. And then you struck her hard enough to knock her down." That's not self-defense, Blake. That's assault and battery on a senior citizen. That's a felony in Montana. The way Jackson said his name, familiar and cold, like he knew him, made Blake flinch. How do you know my name? You said it yourself. About 10 times since you walked in here. Jackson tilted his head slightly. Blake Harrington III, son of Senator Blake Harrington, Jr. I know exactly who you are. Something in Jackson's tone made Blake nervous in a new way. This wasn't just a local tough guy protecting his mom. There was something else here, something calculated. So you know who my father is. Then you know you've made a huge mistake. My father has connections, real power. By tomorrow morning, this diner will be shut down. Your mother will be charged with assault, and you'll be in a cell. Jackson smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Your father. Right. Let's talk about your father. He pulled out his phone, not frantically, like Blake had, calmly, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He scrolled through his contacts, found a name, and pressed dial. Then he hit the speaker button and set the phone on the nearest table. It rang twice before a crisp, professional woman's voice answered. This is the office of Senator Harrington. Yeah, hi, Jackson said, his tone casual. This is Jackson Cunningham. I need to speak with the senator. It's about his son. There was a pause. I'm sorry, sir, but the senator is in a meeting. If you'd like to leave a message, tell him it's urgent. Tell him his son Blake just committed felony assault in a public place, and it's been recorded by multiple witnesses. Tell him he has about 4 minutes before the local police arrive, and he might want to get ahead of this story. Another pause, longer this time. Please hold. The diner was absolutely silent. Even Blake had stopped talking, confusion and anger warring on his face. How did this nobody have a direct line to his father's office? How did he know the right words to get through? Less than 30 seconds later, a different voice came on the line. Male, authoritative, used to being in control. This is Senator Harrington. Who am I speaking with? Jackson Cunningham, sir. I'm calling from Martha's Diner in Maple Creek, Montana. I'm here with your son Blake and his girlfriend Vanessa. About 3 minutes ago, your son struck my 73-year-old mother in the face hard enough to knock her to the ground. The assault was unprovoked and has been recorded by multiple witnesses on video. The police have been called and are en route. There was a sharp intake of breath. Put my son on the phone. Now, Jackson gestured to Blake. He wants to talk to you. Blake grabbed the phone like a lifeline. Dad, thank God, this guy is crazy. He threatened me. His mother attacked me with hot coffee and, Blake! The senator's voice cut through his son's babbling like a knife. Did you hit a woman? She assaulted me first. I was defending. Did you or did you not strike a woman? Blake's mouth opened and closed. It wasn't like that. She was incompetent, and she, answer the question. Blake. Yes, but Dad, you don't understand. The sound that came through the phone speaker was something between a groan and a roar of pure frustration. You idiot. You absolute idiot. Do you have any idea what you've done? We're 8 months from the election. 8 months. I've spent 2 years building a campaign around family values and respect for working Americans, and you just assaulted a 73-year-old waitress in her own diner. Dad, I don't care what she did. You don't put your hands on a woman. You don't put your hands on a senior citizen, and you sure as hell don't do it in public where people can record it. The senator's voice was rising now, the careful politician's polish cracking. Where's the man I was speaking with? Put him back on! Blake, his face now completely drained of color, handed the phone back to Jackson. I'm here, Senator. Mr. Cunningham, I apologize on behalf of my son. His behavior is inexcusable. I want to assure you that he will face appropriate consequences. If your mother requires medical attention, my office will cover all expenses. If she wishes to press charges, I won't interfere. My son needs to learn that actions have consequences. It was a good speech, practiced, sincere sounding, the kind of thing that played well on camera. But Jackson heard what wasn't being said. The senator was already in damage control mode, already thinking about how to spin this, already calculating how to minimize the impact on his campaign. "That's very generous of you, Senator," Jackson said, his tone neutral. "But I think we both know how this usually plays out. Your son faces charges, your lawyers drag it out. Maybe he pleads to a misdemeanor and pays a fine. My mother gets a settlement with a non-disclosure agreement. The video mysteriously disappears or gets buried. And 6 months from now, Blake does the exact same thing to someone else because he's learned that Daddy will always fix his mistakes." Silence on the other end of the line, long enough that Jackson knew he'd hit the mark. "What do you want, Mr. Cunningham?" The senator's voice was harder now, more calculated. This was the real man, the political operator. "I want justice. Real justice. I want your son prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want him to stand in front of a judge and answer for what he did. And I want to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. That's not how the world works. Maybe not your world, Senator. But it's about to be how this works." Outside, the wail of police sirens was getting closer. The local sheriff's department, responding to Blake's 911 call. Blake had regained some of his composure now that his father was involved. "You hear that? That's the cops. You're done. You threatened me. You kept me here against my will. That's assault and false imprisonment." Jackson ended the call and pocketed his phone. He turned to face Blake, and the look in his eyes made Blake's renewed confidence evaporate. "I didn't keep you here. You're free to leave any time. The door's right there," he gestured. "Go ahead. Walk out." Blake looked at the door, looked at the construction workers blocking the path, looked at the faces of everyone in the diner, all of them witnesses to his crime, all of them looking at him with disgust. You people are holding me here. No one's touching you." "Son," Tommy the construction worker said, "we're just standing here having our breakfast. You can walk past us any time." The sirens stopped outside. Car doors slammed, boots on pavement. Sheriff Tom Dalton walked through the door of Martha's Diner like he'd done 1,000 times before. He was a big man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and sharp eyes that had seen pretty much everything Maple Creek had to offer. He'd been sheriff for 20 years, and before that he'd been a deputy for 10. He knew every person in this town. He'd watched most of them grow up. His eyes swept the scene. Rose, sitting in a booth with an ice pack pressed to her face. Blake and Vanessa, standing in the middle of the diner looking like cornered animals. Jackson, calm and still near his mother, and about 15 other people, all watching with an intensity that told him something significant had happened here. "All right," Sheriff Dalton said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Got a call about an assault. Someone want to tell me what's going on?" Blake lunged forward, his words tumbling over each other. "Sheriff, thank God. That man there." He pointed at Jackson. "He threatened me, said he was going to throw me through a window. He kept me here against my will. I want to press charges, assault and false imprisonment." Sheriff Dalton looked at Jackson, really looked at him, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition? Maybe. Or maybe just the recognition that this was a man who'd seen combat, who carried himself with the bearing of someone dangerous. "That true, son? You threatened this man. I told him if he made one more threat against my family, I'd put him through the window," Jackson said calmly. "That was after he struck my mother hard enough to knock her to the ground." The sheriff's eyes moved to Rose, taking in the swelling bruise, the ice pack, the way she was holding herself. "Miss Rose? You all right?" "I'm fine, Tom," she said quietly. "Just shaken up." "Did this man strike you?" He gestured to Blake. Rose hesitated. Jackson could see the conflict in her eyes. She didn't want trouble, didn't want to make a fuss, wanted to just let it go and move on with her life because that's what she'd always done. But she also knew her son was watching, knew that if she didn't speak up now, she'd be teaching him that violence against women was acceptable as long as you apologized after. "Yes," she said finally. "He slapped me, knocked me right down." Blake exploded. "That's a lie. She spilled hot coffee on me. I was defending myself. There's video, Sheriff, the old farmer said, holding up his phone. Multiple videos. Want to see? Sheriff Dalton took the phone, watched the footage. His jaw tightened as he saw Blake's hand connect with Rose's face, saw her fall. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. Blake Harrington, you're under arrest for assault and battery on a senior citizen. What? No, you can't. Do you know who I am? Who my father is? I know exactly who your father is, son. Doesn't give you the right to hit a woman. Sheriff Dalton pulled out his handcuffs. Turn around. Hands behind your back. This is insane. She assaulted me first. She spilled a drop of coffee on a table. That's not assault. But what you did sure as hell is. He looked at his deputy, a younger man named Miller who'd just walked in. Read him his rights. As Deputy Miller began the Miranda warning, Blake's veneer of civilization completely shattered. You're making a mistake. My father will have your job. I'll sue this entire town. You're all going to regret this. Vanessa, who'd been silent, finally spoke up. Blake, shut up. Just shut up. She looked at the sheriff. I'm not with him. I mean, I was, but I'm not. I didn't know he was going to do that. Can I just go? Need a statement from you first, ma'am, Sheriff Dalton said. Then you're free to leave. As Deputy Miller led Blake out in handcuffs, still shouting threats, the diner collectively exhaled. The tension that had been building finally released. Sheriff Dalton approached Jackson. Don't think I've seen you around town before. I'm Rose's son. Just got in this morning. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. You got a military bearing about you, son. What branch? Army. Was, huh? Sheriff Dalton knew that meant special operations, knew that men who said was, instead of giving details, were the ones who did things that stayed classified. Well, thank you for not actually throwing him through the window. Would have been a lot of paperwork. Jackson almost smiled. Thought about it. I bet you did. The sheriff looked at Rose. Miss Rose, you want to press charges? Full charges, I mean. This can go as high as a felony if you want it to. Rose looked at her son, saw the quiet encouragement in his eyes, saw him wordlessly telling her that she deserved justice, that she deserved to stand up for herself. Yes, Tom, I want to press charges. Good, that's good. He pulled out a notepad. I'll need full statements from everyone who witnessed it. This is going to take a while. As the sheriff began taking statements, Jackson sat down next to his mother. He gently took the ice pack from her hand and adjusted it against her face, his touch impossibly tender for a man who'd spent the last hour radiating barely controlled violence. When did you get home, baby? Rose asked softly. Early this morning. Wanted to surprise you. Some surprise. She tried to smile but winced. You didn't have to do that. Threaten him, I mean. I've dealt with worse. I know you have. But you shouldn't have to. Jackson's jaw tightened. No one gets to put their hands on you, Mum. No one. I don't care who their father is. He could make trouble for us. His father's a senator. Let him try. They sat in silence for a moment, and Rose studied her son's face, saw the scar, the hardness in his eyes, the way he held himself. What have you been doing, Jackson, these past 3 years? My job. And what job requires you to disappear for 3 years and come back looking like you've seen hell? Jackson didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The places he'd been, the things he'd done, they lived in classified files and in the nightmares he never talked about. How could he tell his mother that he'd spent the last 3 years in a shadow war, hunting men who wouldn't hesitate to do to others what Blake had just done to her, but 1,000 times worse? How could he tell her that he'd become very, very good at stopping them, permanently, in most cases? I keep people safe, he finally said. That's my job, Mom. I keep people safe. Rose reached up and touched his face, her trembling hand gentle against his scarred cheek. Who keeps you safe, baby? He didn't have an answer for that. The next 3 hours were a blur of statements and phone calls, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice starting to turn. Blake was processed at the county jail, still screaming about his father, about lawsuits, about how everyone was going to pay. Vanessa gave her statement and left town so fast she probably broke the speed limit. The videos were collected as evidence. Witness statements were taken and notarized. And then, just as the lunch rush was supposed to be starting, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside Martha's diner. Sheriff Dalton looked out the window and swore quietly. "That'll be the senator himself. That man doesn't waste time." Blake Harrington Jr. stepped out of the lead vehicle like a man arriving at a campaign stop. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit. Everything about him screamed power and authority. He was flanked by two men in suits who were obviously lawyers, and a woman carrying a briefcase who was probably a PR handler. He walked into the diner, and every eye turned to him. This was a man who commanded attention without asking for it. A man who'd spent 30 years in politics learning how to read a room and control it. His eyes found Rose first, saw the bruise on her face. Something flickered in his expression, genuine regret or perfectly performed regret. It was hard to tell. Then his gaze moved to Jackson, and he went very still. "Mr. Cunningham," the senator said. "I wonder if I might have a word." Jackson stood. "Senator." They moved to a corner booth, away from the others. The lawyers and the PR handler stayed by the door. This was going to be a private conversation. Senator Harrington folded his hands on the table. "My son is an idiot. I want you to know that I know that. I've known it for years. I've bailed him out of fights, DUIs, assault charges that never made it to court. I've paid settlements. I've made problems go away. I thought I was protecting him. What I was really doing was creating a monster." It was a good speech. Honest-sounding, vulnerable, the kind of thing that made voters think you were real, relatable. Jackson wasn't impressed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm not here to make this go away. Not this time." The senator's eyes were hard now. "My son hit a 73-year-old woman in front of witnesses and cameras. There's no spinning that. No fixing it. He's going to face charges, real charges, and he's going to do time. I've already told my lawyers to stand down." Jackson studied him. "You're letting your son go to prison 8 months before an election? I'm letting my son face justice. There's a difference." The senator leaned back. "Look, Mr. Cunningham, I'm a politician. I know how this looks, like I'm sacrificing my son to save my career. And maybe that's part of it. But I'm also a father who's failed, who's enabled, who's created a man who thinks he can put his hands on women without consequences. If I bail him out again, I'm complicit. I'm part of the problem." "Noble," Jackson said, his tone neutral. "I also know who you are," the senator continued. "You think I didn't have my people run your name the second we got off the phone? Jackson Cunningham, Delta Force, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, God knows how many operations in places we're not supposed to talk about. You're not just some local protecting his mom. You're a legitimate American hero." Jackson's expression didn't change. "I'm a man who watched his mother get assaulted. That's all." "That's all," the senator repeated. "Right. Look, here's the reality. This story is going to break. My son, a senator's son, hitting a military widow in her own diner. It's going to be national news by tomorrow morning, and when it breaks, they're going to find out about you, about your service, about the fact that a Delta Force operator came home to find his mother being assaulted by a privileged brat." He paused, letting that sink in. "That's not a story I can control. That's not a story I want to control. That's a story about justice, about consequences, about a mother and son who served this country and deserve respect. So here's what I'm proposing. No settlement, no NDA, full prosecution. My son pleads guilty, takes his sentence, serves his time. Your mother gets justice, and I use my remaining political capital to make sure this never happens to anyone else." Jackson was silent for a long moment. "What do you get out of it?" Honestly, maybe I lose the election. Maybe I don't. But I get to look at myself in the mirror. I get to be the father I should have been 15 years ago. The senator's voice dropped. And maybe, just maybe, my son gets the wake-up call he desperately needs before he kills someone. It was the most honest thing the senator had said, and Jackson believed it, not because he trusted politicians, but because he recognized the look in the senator's eyes, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting a losing battle for too long and had finally accepted defeat. "My mother decides," Jackson said. "Not you, not me. Her. If she wants to press full charges, she does. If she wants a settlement, she gets one. But she makes that choice. Free and clear. No pressure. No manipulation." "Agreed." The senator stood and extended his hand. "For what it's worth, Mr. Cunningham, thank you for your service. And thank you for not actually throwing my son through the window. I'm not sure our relationship could have survived that." Jackson shook his hand. "He got lucky. I was having a good day." The senator actually smiled at that. Then he walked over to Rose, who was still sitting in the booth with the ice pack. He didn't sit, didn't invade her space, just stood at a respectful distance. "Mrs. Cunningham, I cannot apologize enough for what my son did to you. There's no excuse, no explanation that makes it right. If you want to press full charges, you have my complete support. If you want any kind of restitution, my office will make sure you get it. And if you want me to leave you alone, I'll do that too." Rose looked at this powerful man, this senator, standing in her diner looking genuinely remorseful. She thought about all the times she'd been pushed around, dismissed, treated as less than, thought about the years of working until her body ached, of being invisible to people like Blake. "I want him prosecuted," she said quietly. "I want him to understand that you can't treat people this way, that we all matter, even old waitresses who spill coffee. You'll get it. I promise you that." The senator nodded once, then left with his entourage. As the SUVs pulled away, Sheriff Dalton came over to Jackson. That was something. A senator throwing his own son to the wolves. "He's not throwing him to the wolves," Jackson said. "He's letting him face the consequences he should have faced a long time ago. There's a difference." "Maybe." The sheriff looked out at Main Street, at the normal small-town life continuing around them. "You sticking around for a while?" "For a bit. Mom needs someone here." "Good. That's good." Sheriff Dalton headed for the door, then paused. "You know, son, what you did today? Staying calm, not putting that boy through the window even though you wanted to. That took more strength than the alternative. Your dad would have been proud." Jackson felt something crack in his chest at those words. His dad. The man who'd taught him about honor and duty and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The man who'd died doing exactly that, halfway around the world, leaving behind a widow and 2 kids and a flag in a triangle. "Thanks, Sheriff," he managed. After everyone left, after the statements were taken and the diner finally emptied, Jackson helped his mother close up early. They worked in comfortable silence, him wiping down tables while she counted the register, both of them processing the events of the morning in their own way. "You ever going to tell me what you really do?" Rose asked as she locked the register. "Probably not. Is it dangerous?" "Sometimes." "Are you good at it?" Jackson looked at his mother, at this woman who'd survived poverty and widowhood and decades of back-breaking work with her dignity intact, who'd just stood up to a senator's son and demanded justice. "Yeah, Mom, I'm good at it." "Then I'm proud of you, baby. Whatever it is." They stood there in the empty diner, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, and for the first time in 3 years, Jackson felt something like peace. Outside, Maple Creek, Montana went about its business. People who'd been in the diner were already spreading the story. By tomorrow, it would be in the newspapers. By tomorrow night, it would be on the national news. The video would go viral. Blake Harrington III would become a symbol of entitled privilege meeting consequences. His father would give interviews about accountability and justice. Rose would become, briefly, a national figure, the face of working Americans who deserve respect. But right now, in this moment, it was just a mother and son, cleaning up a diner, together for the first time in 3 years. And that was enough. 6 months later, the snow had melted and Maple Creek was drowning in springtime. The mountains were carpeted in wildflowers, purple and yellow and white, stretching as far as the eye could see. The air smelled like pine and fresh earth and new beginnings. And Martha's Diner, that little corner of Main Street that had briefly been the center of a national conversation about justice and accountability, had returned to what it did best, serving breakfast to people who needed it. But some things had changed. Small things, mostly. Good things. Rose still showed up at 5:30 every morning to unlock the doors and start the coffee. Her hands still trembled a little when she carried the heavy trays, and her back still ached by noon. But there was something different about her now. A confidence, a lightness, like she'd been carrying a weight her whole life and had finally been allowed to set it down. The bruise on her face had faded months ago, leaving no physical trace. But the memory of it, the memory of standing in a courtroom and watching her attacker be sentenced to 5 years in prison, that had left a mark of a different kind. A good kind. The kind that reminds you that you're stronger than you think. She was refilling the coffee station when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up, expecting to see Tommy and his construction crew like she did every morning at 7. Instead, she saw a young woman, maybe 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and nervous eyes that darted around the diner like she was looking for an escape route. The woman walked up to the counter, her hands clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. "Are you Rose Cunningham?" Rose smiled, that same warm smile she'd been giving customers for 42 years. "I am, honey. What can I get for you this morning?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I saw your video. The one where you turned down the settlement, where you said that dignity and justice matter more than money." She was shaking now, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My boss, he's been harassing me for months, touching me, saying things, making my life hell. And when I reported it, the company offered me money to sign an NDA and quit quietly. $50,000. More money than I've ever seen. And I was going to take it. I was going to take the money and just disappear, and let him keep doing it to the next woman. But then I saw you." She was crying openly now, not caring that other customers were watching. "You're 73 years old and you turned down $2 million because some things are more important than money." And I thought, if she can do that, if she can stand up for herself, then maybe I can too. So I didn't take it. I filed a formal complaint with the State Labor Board. I hired a lawyer, and yesterday, my boss was fired. 3 other women came forward once they knew I wasn't backing down. 3 women who he'd hurt and paid off. We stopped him. Because of you." Rose came around the counter and pulled the young woman into a hug. "No, honey. You stopped him. I just reminded you what you already knew. That you're worth more than what anyone's willing to pay you to stay quiet." The woman stayed for breakfast, ordered pancakes and coffee, and told Rose her story, all of it, the good and the bad and the terrifying. And when she left, she walked out of Martha's Diner standing a little taller than when she'd walked in. This happened more and more now. People would come to Maple Creek, to this small Montana town, just to meet Rose, to shake her hand, to tell her that she'd inspired them to stand up, to speak out, to refuse to be bought. Rose never quite knew what to do with the attention. She wasn't comfortable being called a hero. She was just a waitress who'd been slapped and had decided not to let it go. But to the people who found her, who drove hundreds of miles just to sit in her booth and drink her coffee, she was proof that ordinary people could stand up to power and win. Jackson watched all of this from his usual spot at the counter. He'd been true to his word. He'd put in for a transfer to training command at Fort Benning, and it had come through. No more deployments to combat zones. No more months of radio silence while he did things that would never make it into official reports. Now he trained the next generation of Delta operators, taught them how to survive, how to think, how to be the kind of soldiers who could make impossible decisions in the middle of the night in places that didn't exist. But every weekend, he drove the 6 hours from Fort Benning to Maple Creek to check on his mother, to sit in this diner and watch her work, to be the quiet presence in the corner that reminded anyone who might be thinking about causing trouble that Rose Cunningham was protected. He was reading the morning paper, an actual physical newspaper because his mother still had them delivered, when Sheriff Dalton slid onto the stool next to him. "Morning, Jackson." "Sheriff, got something you might want to see." Dalton pulled out his phone and showed Jackson an email. It was from the Montana Attorney General's office. They're creating a new task force, investigating workplace assault and harassment across the state. They're calling it the Rose Initiative. Jackson felt something tighten in his chest. Pride, maybe, or vindication. She know about this? Not yet. Figured you might want to tell her. Dalton pocketed his phone. Also got word that Blake Harrington III got transferred. He was at the state prison in Deer Lodge, but they moved him to a federal facility in Colorado. Protective custody. Turns out that when you're a privileged rich kid who assaulted a beloved military widow, you're not real popular in general population. Good, Jackson said simply. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Both men understood that justice sometimes came in forms that weren't written in law books. His father's appeal was denied, Dalton continued. He's going to die in federal prison. 25 years at his age. With his health, he won't make it 5. His lawyers already released a statement saying he's accepting responsibility for his crimes and asking for privacy for his family. What family? Jackson asked. His wife filed for divorce 3 months ago. His daughter changed her name and moved to Canada. His son's in prison. The Harrington name is poison now. Nobody wants to be associated with it. That's what happens when you build your empire on corruption and violence, Dalton said. Eventually, it all comes down. Sometimes it just takes one person being brave enough to refuse to be intimidated. He nodded toward Rose, who was laughing at something Tommy had said, her whole face lighting up with genuine joy. Your mama did that. She refused to be intimidated, and she brought down a whole corrupt system. After Dalton left, Jackson walked over to where his mother was clearing a table. Mom, got a minute? They sat in the corner booth, the same one where he'd watched her that first morning 6 months ago. The vinyl was still cracked, the table still wobbled, but somehow it felt different now. Sacred, almost. Like this booth had witnessed the beginning of something important. There's something I need to tell you, Jackson began. About Dad. Rose's expression softened immediately. She reached across the table and took his hand. What about him, baby? When I was deployed, in Afghanistan, we had this mission. We were hunting a warlord who'd been kidnapping young girls from villages and selling them. We tracked him for weeks, and when we finally found him, when we had him cornered, he tried to buy his way out. Offered us money, more money than any of us would see in our lifetimes. Told us we could take it and disappear, let him go. Nobody would ever know. Jackson's jaw tightened at the memory. Our team leader. He looked at this warlord and said, My country didn't send me here to get rich. They sent me here to stop men like you. And then we arrested him and brought him to justice. Later, our team leader told me that he'd learned that from his father, that some things are more important than money, that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always right. He looked at his mother, at this woman who'd raised him alone after his father died. You taught me that same lesson, Mom. Dad taught it to you, and you taught it to me. And 6 months ago, when that man tried to buy you off, when he offered you millions to stay quiet, you proved that the lesson stuck. You showed the whole country what Dad believed, what you believe, what I believe. That honor and dignity and justice, those things aren't for sale. Rose was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. Your father would be so proud of you, Jackson. So proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of you, Jackson said, his voice rough with emotion. You're the strongest person I know, Mom. Stronger than any soldier I've ever served with. You stood up to power when you had every reason to back down. You chose justice when it would have been so much easier to take the money. And because of that, you changed things. You actually changed things. He pulled out his phone and showed her the email about the Rose Initiative. They're naming a state task force after you, to protect workers from assault and harassment, to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. You're a hero, Mom. A real one. Rose read the email, her hand shaking. I'm not a hero. I just couldn't let him get away with it. Couldn't let him think that he could hit someone and buy his way out of consequences. Your father didn't believe in that. Neither do I. That's what makes you a hero, Jackson said softly. Real heroes don't think they're doing anything special. They just do what's right, because they can't imagine doing anything else. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them thinking about the man who wasn't there. The soldier who died in a desert halfway around the world, fighting for people he'd never met. The husband and father who'd believed that some things were worth dying for. The legacy he'd left behind in the form of a widow who worked in a diner, and a son who'd followed in his footsteps. He's here, you know, Rose said suddenly. Your father. I feel him sometimes. In the morning when I'm opening up, or late at night when I'm closing, I feel him watching, and I think he's proud of both of us. I know he is, Mum. The lunch rush came and went. The afternoon stretched into evening, and as the sun started to set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, Jackson helped his mother close up the diner like he did every Sunday evening before he drove back to Fort Benning. They worked in comfortable silence, him wiping down tables while she counted the register. It was a ritual they'd fallen into, this quiet time together at the end of the day. No cameras, no reporters, no strangers telling Rose she was inspiring. Just a mother and son cleaning up a diner together. You know, Rose said as she locked the register, I've been thinking about retiring. Jackson stopped mid-wipe. What? Not right away, she said quickly. But maybe in a year or two. I'm 73, Jackson. I've been doing this for 42 years. Maybe it's time. What would you do? He couldn't imagine his mother not working. The diner was her life. It always had been. I don't know yet. Travel, maybe. I've never been anywhere. Never had the time or the money. But now, she gestured around the diner. Now this place is worth something. Not because of the building or the equipment, but because of what happened here. Because of the story. I've had offers, Jackson. People wanting to buy it. Turn it into a museum or a restaurant chain or something. You thinking about selling? Rose was quiet for a long moment. I'm thinking about passing it on. To someone who'll take care of it. Who'll remember what it stands for. She looked at her son. This diner, it's more than just a business now. It's a symbol of standing up, of refusing to be silenced. I want to make sure whoever takes it over understands that. Jackson nodded slowly. You'll find the right person, Mom. When you're ready. They finished closing up and walked out into the cool evening air. The street was quiet, the other shops already closed for the night. Maple Creek settling into its familiar rhythm. A town that had briefly been famous and was now gratefully returning to anonymity. But as they stood there, Jackson's truck parked at the curb, Rose looked back at her diner. At the neon sign that said, Martha's Inn, faded red letters. At the windows she'd cleaned 1,000,000 times. At the door she'd unlocked every morning for 4 decades. You know what I'm most proud of, she said suddenly. It's not that I stood up to that man. It's not that I turned down the money. It's that I showed my son that the lessons we taught him, the values we raised him with, they weren't just words. They were real. And they matter. Jackson pulled his mother into a hug. This woman who'd worked herself to the bone to raise him right, who'd instilled in him a sense of honor and duty that had shaped his entire life. You showed a lot more people than just me, Mom. You showed the whole country. As he drove away that night, Jackson watched his mother in the rearview mirror. She stood in front of her diner, one hand raised in farewell, the fading light casting her in gold. She looked small and fragile, this 73-year-old widow in her pink waitress uniform. But Jackson knew the truth, knew that his mother was the strongest, bravest person he'd ever met, that she'd faced down power and corruption, and won, that she'd stood for something when it would have been so much easier to take the money and walk away. The story of what happened at Martha's Diner continued to ripple outward. News outlets still occasionally ran features on Rose, especially around holidays or slow news days. The video of Blake Harrington III slapping her had been watched over 50 million times. Legal scholars wrote papers about the case, about how public pressure and viral media had forced accountability in a way that traditional systems often failed to deliver. But for Rose and Jackson, life had found a new normal. She still served breakfast, he still trained soldiers, and every weekend he came home to make sure she was okay, to sit in that corner booth and watch her work, to be the son that his father would have been proud of. And sometimes, late at night, when the diner was closed and the town was asleep, Rose would stand at the window and look out at Main Street, at this small Montana town that had rallied around her, at the life she'd built from nothing but hard work and dignity. And she'd think about her husband, the soldier who'd taught her that honor was more important than comfort, that doing right was more important than doing easy. She'd think about her son, the warrior who'd come home to protect her and had shown the world that real strength was knowing when to fight and when to show mercy. And she'd think about all the people who'd come through her doors in the months since that terrible morning. The young woman who'd stood up to her boss, the construction worker who'd reported safety violations at his site, the teenager who'd refused to stay quiet about bullying at school. All of them, in their own way, had been inspired by a 73-year-old waitress who'd simply refused to let violence go unanswered. The legacy of Martha's Diner wasn't just breakfast and coffee anymore. It was proof that ordinary people could stand up to power, that justice could prevail over money, that one act of courage could inspire thousands of others. Rose Cunningham had spent 42 years serving breakfast, but in one moment, when faced with the choice between comfort and principle, she'd served something far more important. She'd served justice. And in doing so, she'd reminded a cynical, weary nation that heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry weapons. Sometimes they wear pink waitress dresses and serve coffee with trembling hands. Sometimes they're your mother. And sometimes, the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil against distant enemies. They're fought in small-town diners against the corruption and cruelty that tries to make us believe that money is more important than dignity, that power is more important than justice, that staying silent is easier than speaking up. Rose Cunningham had fought that battle, and she'd won. Not just for herself, but for every person who'd ever been told to stay quiet, to take the money, to let the powerful get away with being cruel. She'd shown them all that there was another way. A harder way, maybe, but a better one. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage comes in all forms, and that standing up for what's right is always worth it, please share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they matter, that their dignity is not for sale, that justice is possible even when power tries to buy its way out of consequences. Leave a comment telling us about a time you stood up for yourself or someone else. Tell us about your own moment of courage, no matter how small it might seem, because every act of courage, every refusal to be silenced, every choice to do right instead of doing easy, those things matter. They ripple outward. They inspire others. They change the world. And subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the everyday heroes among us, the waitresses and construction workers and mothers and soldiers who choose honor over convenience, justice over comfort, courage over fear. Type Amen if you believe that some things are more important than money. Type Amen if you believe that standing up for yourself is always worth it. Type Amen if you believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to back down. May God bless you and keep you. May He give you the strength of Rose Cunningham when your moment comes. May He surround you with people who will stand with you, not against you. And may you always remember that your dignity, your worth, your right to be treated with respect, those things are not for sale, not for $1 million, not for anything, Because some things matter more than money. And you are one of those things. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice and courage and standing up for what's right. We'll see you in the next one. God bless.